Dear colleagues and guests, good afternoon. Let me declare open a session of the Dissertation Council for the defense of thesis by Irina Alekseevna Gladchenko for the degree of Candidate of Political Sciences. Specialty 10-0110, Journalism, on the theme Models of Political Mobilization, Content Distribution in Social Media. The order of St. Petersburg State University of the 7th of August 2020, number 1796-1. I, Blokhin Igor Nikolaevich, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication Theory of St. Petersburg University, was appointed Chairman of this Dissertation Council. Members of the Dissertation Council were appointed by the same order, and let me introduce them to you. Nikolai Alexeyevich Baranov, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of the Department of International Relations of Russian Academy of National Economy and Public Administration under the President of the Russian Federation. In the remote access mode, we have Svetlana Sergeyevna Bodrunova, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of the Department of Mass Communication Management of St. Petersburg University. Svetlana Sergeyevna, can you see and hear us? Yes. Olga Valentinovna Popova, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of the Department of Political Institutions and Applied Political Research of St. Petersburg University. Olga Valentinovna, can you see? Can you hear us? Yes. I can see and hear you very well. Nikolai Sergeyevich Labush, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of the Department of International Journalism of St. Petersburg University. Nikolai Sergeyevich, can you see and hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you. Welcome, everybody. Mikhail Nikolaevich Grachov, Doctor of Political Sciences, Professor of the Department of Theoretical and Applied Political Science of the Russian State University for Humanities. Mikhail Nikolaevich, can you see and hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you very well. And can you see and can you hear me? Yes, we can. Thank you. Gulnar Orlenbaevna Nasimon, Doctor of Political Sciences, Head of the Department of Political Science and Political Technology, Professor of the Department of Political Science of Kazakh National University, named after Al-Farabi, Kazakhstan. Gulnar Orlenbaevna, can you see and hear us? Yes, all is well, thank you. The degree applicant, Irina Alekseevna Gladchenko, is also present. Also, the academic advisor, Ilya Anatolovich Bykov, Doctor of Political Sciences, Associate Professor of the Department of Political Relations in Politics and Public Administration of St. Petersburg University, is present. Dear colleagues, to improve the quality of communication, I invite you to switch off your microphones. I mean, those working in the remote access mode, but please remember to switch them on when you're given the floor. Let me also inform you that our session is being recorded and broadcast online at St. Petersburg University website. The speeches are being simultaneously translated from Russian into English or from English into Russian. During the live broadcast of the Dissertation Council session, an email is currently displayed. At that, anyone can send their opinions and questions to the degree applicant online related to her thesis and the ongoing scientific discussion of her presentation. These questions shall be forwarded to me by our technical support department, and I shall read them during the discussion above. Questions should be related strictly to the applicant's speech and include full name, position and place of employment of the author. Questions that are not related to the scientific discussion, the text and the assessment of the thesis itself shall not be presented. According with the order of awarding academic degrees of Candidate of Sciences and Doctor of Sciences at St. Petersburg University, approved by the local regulations of St. Petersburg University, a session of the Dissertation Council shall be considered competent if at least 2/3 of the approved members of the Dissertation Council are present, but not less than 4 persons. Our council consists of 7 persons. All 7 are present, including 5 council members in the remote access mode. Contact has been established with all the members of the Dissertation Council and the degree applicant. Thus, we have the quorum. Let me set forth the following procedure of today's session of the Dissertation Council, with a total duration of approximately 2 hours. First, Chairman summary report on documents submitted by the degree applicant and their compliance with the applicable regulations, answers to possible questions, 5 minutes. Summary report of the degree applicant outlining the key points of her study, 15 minutes. Questions to the degree applicant related to her report, no more than 2 minutes. Answers of the applicant, no more than 5 minutes. Speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council in turn with their assessment of the thesis, and presentation of the applicant, a summary of their opinions, questions and suggestions to the degree applicant, 10 minutes for each speaker, not more. Speech of the chairman with his assessment of the thesis, no more than 10 minutes. Answers of the degree applicant to all questions and remarks made by council members, not more than 20 minutes. Open discussion. Anyone present may come up with questions and suggestions to the degree applicant related to the theme of his study, not more than 5 minutes, and no more than 2 minutes for each speaker. At that, all the speakers are kindly requested to register themselves and introduce themselves before speaking. Presentation by the chairman of questions sent there in the course of scientific discussion. They're in the online broadcast, Specialisation University website. Answers of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes for each question. Speech of the academic advisor, no more than 3 minutes. Discussion by the Dissertation Council members before the open voting of the results. For this period, sound shall be muted, approximately 5 minutes. That shall be followed by the open individual voting. The chairman shall count the votes and the results shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Make a decision on awarding or not awarding the academic degree, and closing remarks of the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. Well, dear colleagues, do you have any questions or objections to this procedure? If there are no objections, let me proceed. Let me start running the procedure. First, I invite you to switch off your mobile phones. Thank you for your understanding. Let us start our session. The Chairman Summary Report. The thesis by Gladchenko Irina for degree of Candidate of Political Sciences, Specialty 10-0110, Journalism, on the theme Models of Political Mobilization, Content Distribution, Social Media, was accepted for defense by the order of Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University on the 7th of August 2020, number 1792/1. Irina Alekseevna Gladchenko wrote her thesis at St. Petersburg University under the guidance of Doctor of Political Science, Associate Professor of the Department of Public Relations and Politics and Public Administration of St. Petersburg University, Bykov Ilya Anatolovich. Number of publications which set forth the main findings of the thesis, according to the enclosed list, is 8. In peer-reviewed journals from the list approved by the Ministry of Education of Russian Federation, 3 publications. In journals indexed in the scientific databases, Web of Science and Scopus, 5 publications. The degree applicant submitted to the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University a full set of documents for acceptance of a thesis consideration. All the documents comply with Article 12 of Section 3 of the Order. All the documents submitted by the applicant, according to the information I received from the curator of the dissertation, comply with the regulations and are stored at the attestation file of the applicant. Copies are available from the office of the Department for Dissertation Council Activity Support Department, who is currently present. Before I give the floor to the degree applicant, Do you, dear council members, have any questions of the general nature, and is it necessary to present the entire list of documents submitted by the degree applicant? Here, the documents are here. I have them over here. No. If there are any questions, let us give the floor to the degree applicant, Irina Alekseevna. Remember, you have exactly 15 minutes for your presentation. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear council members, dear listeners. The theme of my thesis is devoted to the study of political mobilization, content distribution models, and social media. The use of the latest virtual communication technologies is already firmly rooted in the political environment and is widely used by political actors. The advantages of this type of communication are obvious, while the ability of the participants to independently generate and distribute content should be emphasized. This technical feature of the modern communication platforms is widely researched in terms of electoral political processes. The issues of political content distributions become particularly relevant against the background of numerous political cases that trigger mobilization processes. The use of various tools provided by the social media platforms for communication with voters is no longer news, but the verification of the real effectiveness of these tools still raises questions. However, researchers do not deny that there is still some impact on voters. This statement makes it possible to raise research questions about the specifics of the messages, their form, and possible impact on the audience response. In this slide, you may see the main actors who contributed to the development of the theory of communication, which became the scientific foundation of my study. Many foreign researchers have written about the importance of research and communicative content in the media, including social media, suggesting that the research should be based on forms of communicative interaction. In addition, Russian researchers pay considerable attention to the characteristics of mobilization process and point to the importance of research on mobilization at different levels, micro and macro processes, paying attention to the targeting of impact as well as differentiating understanding of the causes of mobilization processes reflected in the media. To check our hypothesis, we set ourselves the following tasks. To achieve these tasks, we use the following methods: interviewing, case study, content analysis, and analysis of secondary data. For example, in our study, we interviewed students, which allowed us to conclude it's important to study social media because they are the most in-demand source of political information. Also, we decided to use the case study method. While exploring cases, the study should comply with the following criteria. The situation should be limited in time and space and illustrate the following provisions. The situations analyzed in this study are isolated cases on the basis of which we can make some results. It's also important that during the period this social media data can be archived is limited. And the dynamics, following these dynamics, we can observe that some publications accounts become unavailable after some period. So it was important to collect data in real time, which also had impact on the choice of cases. So double cases, two opposite mobilization and demobilization. The first case is shown in lecture of Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine in 2019. The accounts created in social media, Instagram, to support the candidate, we found 156. Out of these accounts, we excluded personal accounts, profiles that do not comply with. And 1st of April, since the information campaign by the 1st of April was launched a long time ago and had significant impact, containing insignificant number of posts, less than 10, and removed accounts. So total number of accounts, finally it was So we randomly selected 15 accounts. Total number of posts was 2,691. The second analyzed case illustrates demoralization process. Situation described in the second occurs in Hawaii, United States of America. In that case, a number of citizens protested against construction project. A sample was formed by monitoring accounts of local community representatives. Total number of accounts 1,626. In this slide you may see the key concepts of my thesis. It's important to emphasize that political information distributed in social media has certain forms and characteristics. Analyzing such information, we have opportunity to talk about targeted political communication, which has auditorium and purpose. In our study of content, this is information fixed in one or another form. In case of social media, this information is technically adapted to be distributed in the virtual space. On that, content analysis and other statistical methods are based. Only on the basis of recorded in social media information, researchers have the opportunity to classify users, number of subscribers, and talk about polarization and other availability of opinions, social relations and clustering, and only availability of content enables us to talk about media effects. So the hypothesis of our research is the first models of political mobilization content distribution depend on several basic elements which should be taken into account when defining the model, namely peculiarities of target audiences, specificity of mobilization content, and other methods of this distribution. In order to adequately apply the models of political mobilization content distribution, it's necessary to supplement the existing parameters of the models with an element relevant to the current conditions, namely a time parameter, which would allow estimating and predicting the mutual interaction of virtual and real communities. On the basis of my results, we can identify the following classifications. Classification was based on the basis of impact and negative or positive communication spin. Suggested criteria are shown in the next slide. Spin means positive or negative. Mode. A vector means orientation and power of impact. Emotive content, creating emotional state of the audience, and informative, a market fact. In case of informative, subject mode, also a positive fact is the fact that positive functioning of the subject, and negative which confirms negative function of the subject. Also, we should focus on such an important factor present as symbol. Analyzing a symbol means using linguistic analysis of concepts, and it's based on hashtag analysis. On the basis of our research, we identify the following criteria for distribution of political mobilization content in social media. Name of the model in the first column corresponds to how distribution depends on identified criteria. The first criteria is virality. On the basis, we can identify viral, administrative, and advertising. Second, vector and spin content, which we described earlier. On the basis of these criteria, we can identify positive and negative motive, and positive or negative imperative. The third criteria is a position of structural elements. On the basis of these criteria, the following structural elements: initiator, who distributes the content, audience to whom it is addressed, and form of content. Also, it is possible to identify several types shown in the second column of the table. These types indicate the position of initiator of mobilization process in the overall process structure. The results enable us to make the following conclusions. First, semantic analysis, in our case, is a component of the social symbol. The form symbol, and it's the study shows the symbol has several criteria. The social political symbol has a number of associations, semantic lines. First, not only with the form of visual and textual component. The most efficient impact on the audience, according to the conducted study, is made by the negative content, which contains aggressive message. So, we concluded that it's social media, especially. Thank you very much for your attention. Dear Council members, do you have questions to the degree applicant, to her report, or to the contents of her thesis? May I? Yes, I have a question, please. You divided models of content distribution. Are these models affected, for example, by the modern technology, by the digital technology? Thank you very much for this question. Of course, it's very relevant for my study. In my study shows that technical capacities, such as the use of virtual communication methods, certainly impact distribution of mobilization content, and a part of my thesis is dedicated to the study of this. But unfortunately, in my opinion, this is a very big theme, and in my study I found that it requires more attention. So in the framework of my thesis, I could not fully cover it, but I think it has great prospects for future research. Thank you. Thank you, Irina Alekseevna. Dear colleagues, do you have more questions at this point? Svetlana Sergeyevna has a question. Thank you very much. I would like to ask a question about spin. Why are you using this word instead of tonality? Tone. Because you are using both, but these are two different things. So could you explain why you're using this term? Thank you very much for your question. This is a very good question. Speaking of correct terminology, I decided in the framework of this study, I decided to use this term because it was important to demonstrate focus, positive or negative. While, as I understood from my theoretic research, tone relates more to emotions that within the framework of my study, I didn't have enough space, as I have already said. I see. Thank you, Irina Alekseevna. Dear colleagues, do we have more questions? May I ask one question? Yes, of course, Olga Valentinovna. Irina Alekseevna, in your thesis and in your speech, you focus on the empirical part of your project, but all this, there is a question not about the possibility of conceptualization of your material, but about the presence of the theoretical basis, some theory, maybe competing theories. That would be interesting. That somehow affected the strategy of your research. Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. Of course, the theoretical foundation, in my opinion, is the largest that could be considered in this study, because this study has many fields because of chosen methods. I would be glad to devote more attention to this, but I was limited by the framework, so I had to choose from the vast amount of theories available. I had to choose theories that I wanted to use in my work. The main part is devoted to theories which I considered to be most relevant to the theme. But of course, one can always find objections, but this is exactly the purpose of scientific knowledge. Thank you, Irina Alekseevna. Dear colleagues, do you have more questions? May I ask a question? Yes. Here is my question. Especially the last provision, you said, and also in your thesis, there is a conclusion that aggression is most prominent in social media, especially in the case of young audience. This most, how most? There is no answer to this. What do you mean by most? I couldn't find an answer. So this is something I wanted, and in case of young audience, what is the foundation for this conclusion? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your question. These conclusions are based on a separate study conducted before the study described in my thesis. This was a more complex study conducted among the students of St. Petersburg University, devoted to the study of relations of Russia and Poland. It included many questions, a questionnaire, and on the basis of these study, I made these conclusions. I could not include it in my study in the form of empirical data because I decided it would not be related to the theme and would widen the scope of my study because work has certain limitations and focus. So if that is interesting, I will be happy to provide the empirical materials which I have not included in the theme of my thesis after this session during the discussion period. Thank you. Dear colleagues, do you have more questions? I see there are no questions at this point, so let us proceed to the speeches of the Dissertation Council members and their reviews, assessment of the thesis, presentation of the chairman and suggestions to the author, and external reviews, presentation of external reviews, remarks and negative assessment. I suggest that the applicant answers all the questions and remarks in the end. I see we received no external reviews. Let us hear the speeches of the council members. Dear colleagues, since all the reviews have been published at St. Petersburg University website in advance, I suggest that we read or present only the key points, questions and remarks. I hope the council members have no objections to this. That's fine, thank you. Let's start in the same order as we are listed, the official order. Let's give the floor to Svetlana Sergeyevna Bodrunova. Dear colleagues, I will not read my entire review, but I would like to emphasize some positive and maybe some points that require clarification. Let me put it that way. Speaking of the good points, strong points, I would like to say that the theoretical part of the thesis is quite big, with 3 chapters, and 2 chapters are devoted to discussion on how mobilization content can be seen today and what theories are available, the theory of political mobilization and how it is related with social media content. The author provided several definitions of mobilization, wider and narrower sense of the term, in availability for political action. And it's good that the author understands that there are narrower approaches, and that today it's necessary to shift the study from the static vision or results of mobilization that we often see in scientific articles, where developments are shown in a flat mode. So it's necessary to move to dynamic reconstruction, which for me is very important because it agrees with what we outlined to do today. The analogs with the physical world are often doubtful, but on the other hand, they're quite interesting. Also, I'd like to emphasize that the work has several threads which in the future may lead to development of the study in this zone, such as, for example, the author touches upon the context that users may be elements of the study. This is significant. In St. Petersburg right now, scientific world is starting to face the study of context, and this year in St. Petersburg it happens that in St. Petersburg there was and there will be another international conference devoted to this, but not it has never been discussed. They have never discussed the use of metadata, which is of the users, which is a very important point. So I think this is a fairly interesting contribution, though the author mentions that only briefly. So this is one of the threads for future research. So I'm giving this example as a characteristics for this theme that can become a future. The practical chapter seems to be weaker because a lot is too short in the practical chapter. The 3 cases described cases of most different cases approach is used, and practical analogs are used to describe the role of mobilization pattern. It seems to me that the main drawback is that the author has not included in the practical part the connective action concept of Bennett and Söderberg, which has been available for a long time, maybe for 10 years, which today is a serious, popular instrument for describing mobilization processes, unlike the classical collective action. So connective action would enrich this work significantly. Also, it seems to me that the structure of the work, which has not been played a bad joke on the author, because the theoretical part could be divided into clearer network approach, structural analysis, and then it would be easier. The conclusions made by the author would become clearer, dedicated to each theoretical approach. That would make reading the work easier. So I think that the author should have done that. And also, I don't agree with, and I think maybe the author could comment on this, that online mobilization is different from offline mobilization due to the present specific content and exceptional mass coverage of the audience. Online content and rumors distribution, or even of valid data that bring people to the streets, we see that the distribution from person to person is also based on a unit of content and very quickly gets the wide coverage. But there are 2 significant differences. which demonstrate that today, indeed, there are some specific features such as algorithmization and preferential display of mobilization content, which is a positive part. It's not necessary to the differences are that important. I think some names have been misspelled, but in general my position is that the thesis by Irina Alekseevna Gladchenko corresponds to the basic requirements set by the Order of 2016 on the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the author deserves being awarded the degree of Candidate of Political Sciences, Specialty 10-0110, and this order and the order has not been violated by the author. Thank you. Thank you, Svetlana Sergeyevna. Next, let us give the floor to Nikolai Sergeyevich Labush of St. Petersburg University. My term came so quickly before I could fall asleep. Though the comments are made by Svetlana Sergeyevna, I will continue in the same mode as suggested by the chairman and my colleague, who focused on the key positive and negative points. So that here's what I would like to say. The advantages of the work are clear structure, logic of the study, and what I especially liked, when you look at the table of contents, you have the feeling that everything has been well studied. But in the work of Irina Alekseevna, the differences and peculiarities of instrumental of mobilization and demobilization of the society. So these points presented in Alekseevna's work demonstrate relevance of this study. Here I'd like to add two more points, maybe traditional. At the same time, it's necessary to say that in modern times political mobilization becomes an important tool for addressing totalitarian but political regimes, and in using social media, but information technology in the course of mobilization led to the colored revolutions. And I understand that the author could not illustrate this, but the example of Belarus, I think, is highly relevant for this. The practice of the opposition of the ruling party, where the use of positive and negative content. So everything about the author said about relevance is the need to study. And again, what is good is that the author, the interdisciplinarity, using different works from different fields to analyze not only external impact but internal motive and personal peculiarities, cognitive psychology, verbal linguistics. Irina Alekseevna mentions drawbacks of the works performed by her predecessors, and then following the structure, I must say that setting some tasks, the study and approaches suggested by the author turn into drawbacks. For example, the author suggests to perform 9 tasks which correspond to paragraphs of the thesis, and it seems to me that 9 tasks for a thesis is too much, candidate's thesis, and the author tries to address on 5, 6, so paragraph 1, 3 and 3, 3, a relevant study of processes of 5 pages, and paragraph on emotional aspect and its impact on distribution of mobilization content. The tasks are important, but obviously they should be made bigger. And the author finds an interesting problem, but then it becomes so involved that so this is true about the term community. The explains by a number of methods and then so focuses too much on this issue. Also, let me drop some secondary points. I'd like to mention the following. The author, the work, the theory is strong, careful analysis, careful case analysis, which demonstrate mobilization, demobilization processes to test theoretical provisions, the main provisions of the thesis, quite well validated. It's important to mention personal contribution of the author, which and let's go back to how these advantages turn into drawbacks. Is physical and similarity to physical processes such as laser, chain reaction, information distribution. They are convenient to explain, but such comparisons cannot scientifically describe the essence of this phenomenon filled with love, hate. So the author is too attracted to too much drawn to metaphors, and contamination of the can use these similarities to analyze mobilization processes through social media. Though, of course, this drawback is emotional aspect and its impact on distribution of mobilization content. Even though the focus is only on one emotion, the aggression, in the author mentions some ideas, practical theoretical problems. For example, she suggests an interesting idea on increasing community for mobilization and narrowing community prevention of mobilization situation. The work would be stronger if it contained more practical recommendations, though the results presented by the author contain description of some models and description of the key elements of the mobilization process. A formal drawback is the lack of conclusion by chapter and too many focuses, political content and models, components, characteristics. But generally speaking, the author managed to overcome drawbacks of the existing methods, which in turn are described by static parameters, provided a theoretical explanation, but the conclusion, the thesis by Irina Alekseevna Gladchenko, corresponds to the requirements set by the order on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the degree applicant deserves awarding academic degree of Doctor of Political Sciences, specialty 10-0110, journalism. Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. I'm done. Thank you. Thank you, Nikolai Sergeyevich. Let us give the floor to Olga Valentinovna Popova, St. Petersburg University. Hope you can all hear me, dear colleagues. With your permission, I will make it short. The scientific product presented, I looked as someone who conducts theoretical empirical research. The theoretical section of the thesis seemed very traditional to me, and since we often face situations where candidates' theses in reality hide mere compilation of somebody else's ideas. Here, I always try to see if there is something, speaking of structure, ideas, the empirical part, which can truly belong to the author. And this I found in this work. I will not touch upon the theoretical part, which appeared very traditional to me, and it was obvious that the author tried very hard to suggest her own empirical project. Obviously, this work is not as easy considering the practical interdisciplinary theme of the project, because it includes not only journalism and political science studies, but also political psychology and social sciences and theory, interdisciplinary theories connected with political communications, the theory of perception. So I would say that the work is a success. It seemed to me very interesting. Two things done by the author personally, Irina Alekseevna, in her thesis demonstrates that her methodology, classification of mobilization, political content, she's the author of this classification. This is a step which deserves being mentioned and deserves ensures award in the degree. Also the classification of models, communication of mobilization contact to the audience, in my opinion, contains certain elements of novelty. That does not mean that I had no critical or negative impressions, but these are related not so much to the thesis itself, but to the way the material is presented, because we look at the thesis as a text. So here is something I decided to mention as a significant drawback. Unfortunately, the overall culture of scientific research connected with methodology is declining, and unfortunately I came across this in this work also, because what you expect, you start reading certain elements, but you try to follow the internal logic. The methodological part should include general scientific approaches and how they were used. The methodological section applied to science, and then proceed to medium level theories. I was very upset when the author refers to structural and functional analysis, as she says, structural functionalism as the methodological basis of the work, because she mentions it once and never explains what it is, and there is no explanation of how structural functionalism is used. So here, structural functionalism was created in the 1960s and 1970s, and of Russian scientists I can name maybe one or two authors who are using this methodology still. Hope Mikhail Nikolaevich will agree that I mean him and maybe some Mikhail Vasilyevich Ilyin. But if the author says the method should be explained, so this methodological basis appears the author has not paid enough attention. Secondly, the authors, the basic analysis, models of Irina Alekseevna focuses first of all on peculiarities of target audiences and specificity of mobilization content. Logically, presentation is not enough focus on the existing schemes of argumentation and motivation of political mobilization by the author, and this process of interaction we could expect maybe, if not a system but separate elements connected with the motivation response to be presented in the work. Next, I was not quite satisfied with the fact that among the differences between political mobilization, social media, and political mobilization in offline reality, the author emphasizes only one point: exceptional massive coverage of the audience. I believe then this provision needs some limitations, should be mentioned. Here we should speak about, yes, 80% of our population. This is not the highest rate in the world, but in the internet space, and we all understand that political information is communicated via only to some groups of users, and we're not talking about the subscribers of certain bloggers or users of certain mass media, but also we should remember such phenomena of information seed, where people react only to political information that corresponds to their beliefs. And here it was necessary to clarify this provision, and maybe it was necessary to add some more points, some more differences between offline and online mobilization. And hope my colleagues will excuse me, but I would like to make one more remark of a technical nature. One of her merits, the author mentions introducing into scientific circulation. I would accept this as novelty, maybe like 20 years ago, but not today, where today without any limitation we can find unique works published in any country. Yet everything I have said in no way does not affect the overall positive impression made by the thesis, and does not deny the fact that the author has conducted significant work independently and not only as a participant of some research project, which enables her to claim quite rightly to the degree of candidate of political sciences, specialty 10 journalism. None of the articles of the order has been violated by the author, and yes, I can say that in my opinion we have all the reasons to vote for awarding the degree. I hope I have not taken too much of your time. Thank you, Olga Valentinovna. Now let me give the floor to Nikolai Alexeyevich Baranov, Russian Academy of Public Administration, the President of the Russian Federation. Thank you, dear colleagues. I support the positive opinions already given, the good coverage of the theme and convincing justification of relevance of the author's approach to political mobilization content in social media, and maybe the scientific approaches she has used to explain such concepts as negative concepts and identified differences between communicative impact in the virtual space, mobilization impacts, and some other points. The emotional aspect of the communicative model. In general, the work is very good. It demonstrates Irina Alekseevna's ability to analyze deeply the tasks she has set herself, and in my review I would like to focus on suggestions and recommendations, because Irina Alekseevna is an emerging researcher, so it will be advisable to pay attention to the following. The purpose of the work, in my opinion, the purpose is too theoretical. So the work is done for some, should have some practical purpose, and the practical significance has not been mentioned. Though the scientific novelty provisions 3 and 5 is indicated as practical steps taken by the author. As for the theoretical part, as was already mentioned, I'd like to mention there would be more productive to the author studied sources which are the basis for some theories and concepts. And Nicholas Luhmann with his autopoiesis is very good, that Irina Alekseevna uses social theories, Nicholas Luhmann, but she does that very briefly. And she uses interpretations of his works, quoting social theory, though Luhmann has many works, and she could have used these theories deeper. So in the future it would be necessary to pay more attention to the source and not interpretations of the source. One more remark I'd like to make, speaking of a question already asked Irina Alekseevna, connected with the fact that I have not found the impact of digitalization, a new communication potential provided by the modern technology in the models described in the thesis, and how it affects, how the new abilities, including selectivism, affect these models. I was surprised by the absence of definition of social media. The work is dedicated to social media, but I have never found any clear definition of social media. Because on page 14 the author uses in Instagram, and on page 77 she lists social networks, but there are many new capacities such as podcasting, blogosphere, YouTube. Are these social media or not? It's not quite clear to me. So what is meant by social media here? The well-known work, totalitarian regimes are very famous, except for the source is not, but Untouchable was published in the journal Untouchable Reserve, not in the New Literary Review. I was also surprised the significant amount of text between the chapter title and the first paragraph in each chapter. For example, in the third chapter, this text takes 9 pages, which is more than 4 paragraphs in this work. And that appears strange. In the authors try before the first paragraph, and I believe that it is very important. Why not turn it into a separate paragraph? 9 pages, that's a lot of text. So these, in my opinion, the author needs to pay attention in the future in her research. She needs to pay attention to these remarks, but my overall impression is positive. So my recommendation is about concerning this work by Irina Alekseevna is that the degree applicant deserves awarding the degree of Political Sciences Specialty 10.01.10 Journalism, and Article 11 of the above mentioned order has not been violated. Thank you, Nikolai Alekseevich. Next, let me give the floor to Mikhail Nikolaevich Grachov, Russian State University for Humanities. Thank you. Let me first of all invite you thank you for the opportunity to talk at today's session. I'll be happy to attend it personally, but unfortunately we can work only in this mode. The work makes a very positive impression, and I will not repeat what I have written in my review. It seems that we award degrees in our specialty that we define as journalism. In this case, thesis in political sciences, we have tougher requirements, but for journalism, in the sphere of journalism, here the format is less strict. So I took these points into consideration, and Olga Valentina has spoken a lot already about this, on how we assess works, Specialty 23. Every opponent always wants to say that maybe I would have written this differently, but usually we see how something is written, so all subjective opinion, so it never happens that what we see is exactly corresponds to what we want to see. Also, I'd like to focus on some points which contain scientific novelty. Special attention should be paid to the types of political mobilization content and different types of methods of distribution. This practice of targeted impact is getting stronger, and in my opinion is very rational to look at political content from the point of emotional impact and political processes. So these are things we see in the political world, and the recent trend or destruction of the truth these are issues I have been working on recently. So here it's interesting that when we talk in the theoretical part, the basic concepts according to the author connected with mobilization of processes, research practice, universal understanding, demonstrates high level of analysis and of this study, and the work contains considerations based not on analysis of the key works by foreign, but also the works of Russian researchers, because often when we see candidates' thesis, there is the tradition saying we come across the same names listed in the same order. So the theoretical part is very similar, and they rely on the works of foreign researchers. So here, I think we now time has come not to talk about to retell things written by international authors, but also mentioned by Russian researchers. So in this case, I rejoiced at the author's presentation of works by Russian researchers. Not only foreign colleagues got tribute, and as was mentioned, that maybe Nicholas Luhmann was not described in enough details, but there is an interesting point where the author tries to combine things done by Luhmann with and combining these two approaches, in my opinion, is very successful and enables the author to solve the tasks she has set herself. And maybe if we talk about maybe things I have done myself in the past, indeed, the consideration about the content of political communication, and the most important, it's very important that she is not afraid to address such issues that are a subject of heated public and philosophical discussions connected with the definition of information for many years, maybe like for 60 years ago. Cybernetics tried to define information, but still today researchers cannot agree. And so the author enters this field. And being aware that the definition of information is still not available, she tries to relate this content. So she's trying to link it to demonstrate that it's a narrow is a derivative of information. Page 53, 54, 55. There's an attempt to find something of her own on a high theoretical basis, which is interesting. Maybe, of course, there are things with which I wouldn't agree, but the approach is rather interesting. So we keep talking that terms have analogs, and maybe someone would say that the word content has a Russian synonym, but the fact is that the term content today is used in every work on political communications. So it became common and widely accepted regardless of our attitude, and including it in the theoretical structure. I think the author was successful, and we are grateful to the author for this. So if we of course we would have written this differently. I could make many suggestions how things should be done. So maybe I wouldn't say anything new here, just add to what was said by Olga Valentinovna. Maybe so the thesis is a separate genre of literature, and it requires certain framework, and it's impossible to write a novel It's 30 pages long. So thesis, because is a specific genre. So there are certain rules to be followed, and maybe the problem is that too much attention is pay too much attention to methodology, because I wrote my thesis on theory and methodology of political science. So I always try to. So maybe I don't. So when we talk about the theoretical basis of a study, it's always good to follow a certain logic of science in general, but maybe it would be good to start with the overall scientific methods, interdisciplinary methods, then proceed to social interdisciplinary methods used in our fields, and then to methodology, and at least not only these methods, but also explain how they were used and what results the author wanted to obtain. So I have not included this in my review because I hope Irina Alekseevna will proceed her scientific career, and if she continues, and I would like her to do this, so these points connected with the presentation she should take into consideration. And next, one of my colleagues already said that these fragments presented before the first paragraph, they are quite long.
Их можно было бы обойтись, и что их можно.
It could be avoided, and or it could be the author could turn them into paragraphs.
И другого жанра.
So this style is appropriate for a monograph, and if Irina Alekseevna decides to publish her work, there'll be not 8 pages. For a monograph, that is okay. For a thesis, maybe that's too much, too long. So these genre criteria, there's certain criteria that to be followed if Irina Alekseevna decides to write, after some years, to write her doctoral thesis. Let her make it beautifully, write it beautifully. And speaking of some points, I'd like to focus on some critical remarks. So maybe it would be very advisable for the author to differentiate between political content and politicized content. When we talk about the space for political community or destruction of truth, obviously not every content is political, and politicization of social phenomena is not quite clear how in this work the differences between these two definitions are made, political content and politicized content, and to what degree this differentiation affected the results at all. So here I would like Irina Alekseevna to explain this. At the same time, these are mere comments and do not affect the overall perception, significance and positive impression of the work, which in my opinion is an independent and complete study. And the overall conclusion is that the thesis by Irina Alekseevna on the theme models of distribution of political mobilization content in social media corresponds to the basic requirements set by the Order and Awarding Academic Degrees at St. Petersburg University. I'd like to say that when I had to say this phrase, I read this order, and I'd like to say that it actually complies with this. In Article 11, I'd like to say has not been violated, because not editorial. So Article 11 has not been violated on anti-plagiarism. Indeed, Irina Alekseevna deserves awarding the desired degree of candidate of political sciences, specialty 10-01-10, journalism. Thank you. Thank you, Mikhail Nikolaevich. Now the floor is given to Gulnar Orlinbayevna Nasimova, Kazakh National University, named after Al-Farabi. Once again, good afternoon, dear colleagues, and before my speech, I'd like to thank for the opportunity to take part in today's discussion for the defense of thesis as a member of the Dissertation Council. Today is the second time I'm a member of the Dissertation Council of St. Petersburg University. First time this was conflictology. In general, I agree with my colleagues that the theme is highly relevant, and relevance is beyond any doubt, and literature review of the study of high significance, and there's no absent in social media. Of course, in the theoretical section contains a review of modern theories. Social media suggests a model of distribution, identifies interaction of factors that has impact on the distribution process. The entire review, my whole review, I have submitted. So I'd like to focus on some points, maybe on my remarks or suggestions, which are mostly points for discussion, because I was interested as a member of the council, as an opponent, but at the same time as a researcher, I was some tasks set in the introduction. I started to look at the results, at the conclusions. Then I came back to the theoretical part. So, what questions I have to the author? First, the author is illustration of theoretical reasoning. Looks at the case of Ukraine, presidential elections in Ukraine in 2019, and in application to the mobilization processes. Page 151, the author says the last decade provides enough cases for study and analysis. For example, unrest in Birulova, action of Yellow Vest in France, political process of Pashinyan in Armenia, ethnic riots in Germany, the revolution in Ukraine, protests in Hong Kong, etc. This is my opinion, that these countries, except for Ukraine, never became the subject of in-depth analysis. I don't know if the author deliberately avoids the case of Russia, and this is my opinion once again, and the explanation that the case of Ukraine is and so much attention paid to presidential election in the Ukraine, I was not convinced by this. So this is my first question, and my second question is about the methodology of analysis. First of all, we all know that the modern science contains many automated programs for monitoring social media, and using them would enable the author not only to systematize unstructured data in the information space, but also to estimate the level of content tone, or how negative or how positive it is, because I asked this question already. It was interesting to know if the author did this by hand, or has she used some automated applications, because there's so much data. This is big data, and how can we obtain objective results? And in the end, I still have this question: what is the degree of impact? I wouldn't assess the role of social media so what is the degree of impact? What is the level of impact of social media? And there was no answer to my question, except that there was a study conducted at St. Petersburg University. So I would like to get in the digital, in the assessment, like more, how more, or more or less, we could say, but how can these terms be measured? So these are my points for discussion that do not affect the overall, and the thesis by Alekseevna Gladchenko on distribution corresponds to the basic requirements set by the order of the 1st of September 2016, the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the degree applicant Gladchenko and Alekseevna deserves awarding the degree of candidate of political sciences, specialty 10-0110, journalism. Article 11 of the above-mentioned author has not been violated by the author. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gulnar Orlenbaevna. And with your permission, I will not read my entire review, but let me focus on the points that I would like to discuss. They are not critical or crucial. First of all, the apparatus of the study is too brief, and as a result, in definition of the object as political mobilization in social media without clarification of the quality of the process or phenomena, tasks, award practical application, complex analysis of the model, includes regulation of the political mobilization process and the authors to involve with the analysis of mobilization process, which affected the choice of sources and preliminary conclusions. Focus on communication leads to the fact that little importance is given to other factors of political mobilization, which make it ineffective. The truth is, the author is aware of this problem, but defines it as something that cannot be resolved on page 50. The point of virtual events happening in reality, but this question, when virtual instruments coincide, and there's no effect, complex of factors that can be classified as virtual personality, addressed by the author on pages 79-80, and its origin is not important at all. The method of description of information impact compared to laser impact treatment seems doubtful, appears doubtful, as was mentioned by my colleagues. As the chairman, I'd like to say that the thesis corresponds to scientific specialty 10-0110, journalism and political science, and the thesis corresponds to the specialty formula. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that the thesis by Irina Alekseevna Gladchenko corresponds to the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University and the applicant deserves awarding academic degree of candidate of political sciences, specialty 10-0110, journalism, article 11 of the above mentioned order has not been violated. Now I invite Irina Alekseevna to answer questions and remarks made by the council members. Please remember, you have no more than 10 minutes, so it would be good if you could make it quicker. Thank you. Dear council members, thank you for all your comments, for reading my work so carefully. Of course, all your comments and critical remarks I will take into account into my future work, and I certainly agree with all the comments related to the structure of my work. What I would like to say is that since the text had too many themes, material presentation was challenging maybe for me as a student, but in my opinion I selected the best possible structure, though of course I agree that the comments regarding the structure are relevant and maybe require more attention from my side. As for the technical mistakes, I apologize. The constant changes in the text left me no chance to avoid technical mistakes that you found in my text. As for the comments regarding metaphors and as a method I used in my work, there was an opinion, and maybe I agree with it. On the other hand, that metaphors are convenient, but maybe they are not scientific enough. The matter is that this method was chosen by, there was a reason for my choice. One of my tasks was use the time parameter, and having analyzed the theoretical material on communication models, in my opinion, have not provided any models that could include the time parameter. That is why we decided to use knowledge from other spheres, and I'd like to emphasize, and I mentioned that many times already, that this analogy is conceptual. This is only the first step of my research, and in the more detailed elaboration requires more information, and so I would agree, and I would allow myself to disagree with you that I'm too much fascinated by metaphors. I think this was irrelevant. It is relevant for my study. As for the practical significance of my work, I agree with this comment. Also, there was a comment: the purpose is too theoretical and does not include the theoretical significance, though in the tasks such problem was to define the practical significance of the work was mentioned. I don't agree that results are too theoretical. I think the model and classification of the obtained data has some practical significance as well. I agree that at this point the model is too theoretical and requires classification. The emotional aspect As for example, Svetlana Sergeyevna said, also there was a comment that this approach maybe is too mechanical, so maybe one may get this impression because because we selected the conceptual approach, and of course not all the tones and shades of emotions of content distributed by social media they cannot develop. But in case with mobilization process, we're not interested in the shades, but in presence or absence of emotions, is positive or negative, and motive. And in practically it does not reflect is negative or positive, is positive and negative functioning of the object. The case with Belarus, of course, is very interesting, especially in the framework of this study, and I will be happy to analyze this case, but the results are not available yet. I have not done so, so I would be happy to give an opinion on this, but unfortunately I won't dare, because I have not studied this. I wouldn't dare to do so because I have not studied this. As for digitalization and definition of social media, in my work, social media are described as technological platforms. This may lead to some confusion, maybe inaccurate information. I called Instagram as an instrument of social media, but I think the Instagram is an instrument which includes some specific instruments, while Facebook or YouTube have their own instruments used when working with a particular platform. So in my work, social media are considered from the point of social network as technological platforms. As for politicized or political information or content, this was a serious issue for my study, because to create the method for my study, I needed to understand what we see as political or politicized content. And when analyzing the case of elections in Ukraine, political content and political information published in accounts, we explored, we looked at particular information related to Zelensky as a politician. We know that he was a showman before, and he was famous before he was a politician. He was quite well known. It was hard to separate accounts devoted to his earlier activities from those dedicated to his current activities. Here everything was mixed, and so we had to define accounts on the basis of prevailing information, or I relied more on the titles. Accounts dedicated to Zelensky's activity as a politician contained certain definitions which included information broadcast by So I suggested that this political information is the information published during the period Vladimir Zelensky defined himself as a politician. Yet, it should be mentioned that the politicized information had the greatest impact, in our opinion, on his success, which I also said in my thesis, where Vladimir Zelensky's case is analyzed, the section dedicated to hashtags. There was a question on cases I used in my work, that many cases contain mobilization processes, but this material has not been analyzed and included in the work. This provision is connected with my student activity, which helped me to understand how social media content should be analyzed and gathered. And one of the important points is that the information present in the social media very quickly becomes blurred or diluted. I heard this term from Svetlana Sergeyevna, who helped me to conduct the study to some degree, and what was important is that information has to be collected in the real-time mode. Zelensky case and the second case, Hawaii case, I collected when the information was published. After I tried, for example, to check the information dedicated to elections, which took place in April, and already in September the information was very diluted or obscured with other, so my hashtag method was not working anymore. So the cases that I mentioned, they prove relevance of this study, because that is a large amount of data, which maybe is too much for me, though maybe certain technical instruments I have used, maybe not so much to collect information, but to provide qualitative assessment of hashtags that I collected. That is why I will be happy to analyze all the cases mentioned in my work, such as Armenia, Germany, or Hong Kong, with pleasure. But speaking of collecting information in real time, I didn't have the opportunity to do so. Maybe in the future I will conduct a more in-depth study and will be able to collect some secondary data that will allow me to conduct another study and improve my method. But right now I cannot suggest such a method. Maybe I have missed. Have I missed anything? Maybe no. Thank you, Irina Alekseevna. Dear colleagues, is it necessary to spend extra time to discuss the answers? Are we all satisfied with the answers given by the applicant? Yes, we are. Or we need more discussion? No. Okay, thank you. Then let us proceed. And am I right in thinking that during our session we have not received any questions online? Then let me give the floor to the academic advisor of the applicant, Ilya Anatolovich Bykov. Ilya Anatolovich, welcome. Dear Chairman, I beg your pardon, dear Council members, dear colleagues, let me say some words in support of Irina Alekseevna Gladchenko, the degree applicant, who has been my student since she was a master's student. She wrote her thesis during the period she was a doctoral student, took part in 2 research projects, a representation of dynamics of ethnical, political, and the second project connected with the study of aggression and political discourse in modern Russia. Also, Irina Alekseevna frequently spoke at scientific conferences, doctoral student conferences, the secretary of our section on political PR in Russia, public relations in Russia and abroad. And that is why I'd like to say that Irina Alekseevna was one of the best most active doctoral students who took part in various activities and published a number of articles on this subject. Of course, it's much easier for me to see some drawbacks, which I consider to be my faults as well as the academic advisor. So some structural mistakes appear more obvious to me, and in the future I hope I will be able to write better theses. I am asking you to support the applicant. Thank you, Ilya Anatolovich. Our session, some participants are working in the remote access mode. That is why I have to ask if there are any, if the Dissertation Council members or the degree applicant have any unanswered questions connected with working in the remote access mode. No. Then, if there are no questions, there's another question to the Dissertation Council members. We have the opportunity, before we vote, to take a break to discuss the results of defense. Broadcast shall be interrupted for this period. Do we need such a discussion, or can we vote? Olga Valentina, what do you think? Do we need a break before we vote? I think we don't. No, we don't need a break. Let's finish. I saw the reaction, so we'll take no break. Okay then. I invite. I would like you to please answer. I put the question of awarding to Gladchenko the degree of candidate of political sciences, specialty 10-01-10 journalism, to the open individual vote. Let me remind you that a decision of the Dissertation Council shall be considered positive if more than a half, but no less than 3 members of the Dissertation Council present have voted for it, according to Article 23 of the Order. Svetlana Sergeyevna Bodrunova, your opinion? I am for awarding the degree. Thank you. Nikolai Sergeyevich Labush, your opinion? I am for. Thank you. Olga Valentina Popova. Dear colleagues, I think it's necessary to support the positive decision. Nikolai Alexeyevich Baranov, I am for awarding the degree. of Political Sciences to Irina Alekseevna. Thank you. Mikhail Nikolaevich Grachev. I am for awarding the degree. Thank you. Gulnar Orlenbaevna Nasimova. I am for awarding the degree. Thank you. And as the chairman, Igor Nikolaevich Blokhin, my opinion is to award the degree of candidate of political sciences to Irina Alekseevna Gladchenko. Thus, dear colleagues and guests, let me inform you that out of 7 members of the Dissertation Council present, 7 voted for, no one voted against, and no one abstained. Thus, the decision to award to Gladchenko Irina Alekseevna the degree of candidate of political sciences, academic specialty 10-0110, journalism, has been made. Dear colleagues, since our session was held with council members working in the remote access mode, do council members, the degree applicant, and others have any questions regarding the procedure of today's session? No. I have to get answers from everybody. Svetlana Sergeyevna, I do have any questions regarding the procedure? No, I don't. Nikolai Sergeyevich, no. Olga Valentinovna, I have no questions, no remarks regarding the procedure. Nikolai Alexeyevich, no. Mikhail Nikolaevich, I have no questions and no questions, no remarks. Gulnar Orlenbaevna, no questions regarding the procedure. No question, no remarks. Thank you. And thus, I'd like to give the floor to the degree applicant for her closing remarks. Irina Alekseevna, you have like 2 minutes for this. Very well. Thank you very much. Dear council members, I am very grateful to you for reading my work so carefully and for making critical remarks which will certainly become the basis for my future work. Ilya Anatolievich, thank you very much as my academic advisor. Igor Nikolaevich, thank you very much as the chairman of the council for conducting this session, and my great respect to the university and the faculty of journalism for giving me the resources, the opportunity to write this work to improve my scientific skills, my research skills. Thank you once again, and thank you. Dear colleagues, I congratulate on behalf of the council members Irina Alekseevna, who've been awarded the degree of candidate of political sciences. Also, I'd like to congratulate Ilya Anatolievich Bykov with successful defense of his doctoral student. Also, I'd like to thank the department where the work was written, public relations in politics, and Vera Alexeyevna Ochkasova, and all the members of the department for their support and guidance, without which this defense would never take place. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, dear council members who attended in person or in remote mode. Thank you. It was a pleasure to work with you, and thank you for being on time. Thank you very much. Thank you and goodbye.
Большое спасибо, что пригласили принять участие в работе сегодняшнего заседания. Поздравляю.
Спасибо. Так,
Ирину Алексеевну.
Congratulate Irina Alekseevna, Ilya Anatolievich. Dear colleagues, I declare the session closed. I thank you for your participation. Please stop broadcasting. Thank you and goodbye.